A million-pound hypercar, cut clean in half, left that way for over a year. And when the owner finally asked Bugatti for help, not an engine, not a gearbox, just one tiny bolt, they told him no. So he found people who could do it without them. And today, that car drives again. If you've been following the chaos around Bugatti ownership lately, you already know where this is going. A few weeks ago, Mat Armstrong blew the lid off something a lot of Bugatti owners had quietly suspected for years, that once your warranty runs out, you're basically on your own, no matter how much money you've spent. Now it's happening again. This time it's Mark McCann and his Bugatti Veyron, a car that, for the past several months, has existed as two separate halves sitting in a workshop, waiting on a gearbox that Bugatti itself apparently considered a lost cause. What you're about to see is the story of how a small team of independent specialists took on a job most people would call impossible, ran into two separate problems that could have sent the entire project back to square one, and then, after Bugatti refused to sell a single fastener, somehow got this car moving under its own power again. Stick around, because the ending of this one is genuinely emotional. Let's rewind for a second, because the why here matters. Mark's Veyron developed a fault with its reverse gear, the kind of issue that, on almost any other car, would mean a trip to the dealer, a diagnostic, maybe a new component, and you're back on the road in a week. Not with a Veyron. The Veyron's transmission isn't just a gearbox bolted to the back of an engine. It's a sealed dual-clutch unit built into the structure of the car, packed with components that were custom-engineered by Bugatti and, in many cases, never sold as standalone parts to anyone. When something goes wrong inside it, you're not looking at a repair. You're looking at a full transmission rebuild. And to even get to that point, the car has to be physically separated into front and rear sections. So that's exactly what happened. Mark's Veyron was split into two halves, and the clock started ticking on what would become a year-long fight to put it back together. Here's where things get genuinely wild. Inside that gearbox are clutch plates, the components responsible for actually transferring power from the engine to the wheels. These aren't generic, off-the-shelf parts. They're Bugatti-specific, low-volume, and as Mark discovered, completely unobtainable through official channels. So a specialist called Pascal, working out a transmission shop, took on a task that sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud: reverse engineer these clutch plates from nothing. No factory drawings, no supplier, just a failed originals, a set of measuring tools, and roughly 12 months of trial, error, and precision machining. Think about that for a second. An entire year spent recreating components for a single car because the manufacturer of that car wouldn't or couldn't provide them. And eventually it worked. The rebuilt gearbox was finished, tested, and shipped back to the team responsible for putting the Veyron back together. That team operates out of a workshop that specializes in exactly this kind of car, the ones most garages won't even attempt to touch. Multi-million-pound Ferraris, rare Lamborghinis, and now, a Bugatti Veyron that's been sitting in two pieces for the better part of a year. But before anyone could even think about bolting this car back together, they found a problem. During testing, the technicians noticed a seal on the gearbox showing signs of moisture, a light film around one specific area. Now, on its own, that's not necessarily a disaster. The team had worked on enough Veyron gearboxes to know that a small amount of moisture around that exact spot wasn't unusual. Plenty of healthy units showed the same thing. So there was a real possibility this was just normal, just how these units behave. But here's the catch. If they were wrong and that seal actually failed down the line, the consequences would be brutal. The car would need to be split in half again. After everything. After a full year of work. So they made a judgment call. They cleaned everything up, made sure the components were aligned to the kind of precision measured in fractions of a millimeter, and pressed forward, fully aware that if this decision came back to bite them, it would cost them months. If problem one was stressful, problem two was almost worse because of how small it was. While reassembling the oil cooling system, one of the technicians spotted something dripping from a connection point. After tracing it back, they found the source. A failed O-ring, a small rubber seal, the kind of part that costs less than the price of a coffee. But here's why this nearly derailed the entire project. That O-ring sits in a location that is only accessible while the car is still in two pieces. Once the front and rear sections of the Veyron are joined back together, That area becomes completely sealed off, permanently, unless, of course, you split the car apart again. So picture this alternate timeline. The team finishes a rebuild, joins the two halves, fills the system, runs a car, and weeks later, that same O-ring fails. Suddenly, you're not looking at a cheap rubber seal anymore. You're looking at splitting a Bugatti Veyron in half a second time, just to fix something that, on any normal car, you'd grab from a hardware store bin. And knowing how Bugatti's parts policy had gone so far, there was a good chance even getting that O-ring through official channels would mean being told to buy an entire pipe assembly, turning a $1 part into a bill running into the thousands. They caught it, replaced it, and moved on, knowing they'd just dodged what could have been the project's worst-case scenario. With both problem areas sorted, it was finally time for the moment this entire saga had been building toward, rejoining the two halves of the Veyron into a single car. Bugatti, naturally, has a purpose-built alignment rig for this exact job, a precision tool that doesn't exist outside their own facilities. So the team did what independent specialists always seem to do in these situations. They built their own version, using workshop equipment, careful measurement, and a healthy dose of improvisation. One person on the team described the setup as somewhere between a basic engineering trolley and a NASA workbench. Every single connection between the two halves had to be accounted for. Fuel lines, coolant hoses, electrical looms, and a set of titanium bolts specifically engineered to break in a crash as a safety feature. As one of the technicians put it, there are probably close to 1,000 individual components on this car that simply cannot be replaced if something goes wrong. Slowly, carefully, checking and rechecking alignment at every stage, the team pushed the two sections of the Veyron together by hand. For the first time in years, Mark's car was a single, complete vehicle again. And for Mark himself, this was a moment he genuinely never experienced. He had never sat in this car, never seen a hole. After everything, this was his first time looking at his own Veyron as one piece. You'd think, at this point, the hard part was over. It wasn't. Two specific fasteners were missing, a titanium spline nut, critical to securing the connection between the front and rear sections of the car, and an engine mount bolt, responsible for holding the powertrain itself in place. These aren't decorative. These are structural. So Mark did the obvious thing. He called Bugatti and asked to buy a nut and a bolt, not a gearbox, not an engine assembly. Two fasteners for a car worth roughly £1 million. The response? Bring the entire car to an official Bugatti facility, or you get nothing. Mark actually took this far enough to consult a barrister about whether this kind of blanket refusal was even legal. The answer was complicated. Technically, yes. Dealers are bound by manufacturer policy, and there's no direct contractual relationship between Bugatti and an owner who bought the car secondhand. But the barrister also pointed out that this kind of refusal could potentially be challenged through an automotive ombudsman, as an example of an unreasonable trading practice. And maybe the most telling part of this whole exchange? Even the dealer Mark spoke to admitted it wasn't their decision. It was Bugatti's policy. Full stop. With the fastener still missing, the team made the call to keep going anyway. Here's a fact that sounds almost made up. The Bugatti Veyron has 10 separate radiators. 3 for engine cooling. 3 intercoolers for quad-turbo setup. 1 for the engine oil. 1 for the transmission. 1 for the differential. And 1 for the air conditioning system. Most cars get by with 1 radiator. The Veyron needs 10 just to keep its quad-turbocharged W16 engine from cooking itself alive. After sitting apart for over a year, nobody knew if any of those 10 radiators, or the dozens of connections between them, had developed a leak. So the team ran a vacuum test across the entire cooling system, pulling negative pressure through every line and checking whether it held steady. It held. Perfectly. Not a single leak across 10 radiators and every connection between them. Coolant went in, battery went in, exhaust went on, brakes were bled. Everything was ready except for one thing. Before anyone turned the key, there was one specific worry hanging over the whole team. Not the engine, not the electronics, but something called the clutch kiss point. That's a precise moment where the clutch starts to engage and the car begins to move. That setting had originally been calibrated for the old clutch material. Pascal's reverse-engineered clutch plates were built to spec, but nobody could be completely sure they behave identically. Worst case, the car could lurch unexpectedly, forward or backward, the instant it was put into gear. And remember, this is a workshop full of priceless cars, including a pair of Ferrari F40s parked nearby. Nobody wanted any surprises. The team fired it up. The transmission's hydraulic pump kicked in. Pressure built and held. No fuel leaks. Everything was behaving exactly as it should. Then came the gear selection. First gear, straight across. Reverse, through neutral. Mark, by every account visibly emotional after everything this car had put him through, selected first gear. The Veyron rolled forward, under its own power, for the first time in years. But forward wasn't the real test. The entire reason this saga started was a reverse gear fault. So Mark shifted back through neutral and selected reverse. The car rolled backward, and the whole workshop erupted. Take a step back and look at what actually just happened here. A Bugatti Veyron that arrived at this workshop in two separate pieces, missing a working transmission, with a gearbox that had effectively been written off, now drives forward and backward. Rebuilt almost entirely by independent specialists who reverse-engineered the parts Bugatti wouldn't sell. And Bugatti's contribution to all of this? Refusing to sell a single nut and bolt unless the entire car was shipped to them. This is now the second time in a matter of weeks that we've seen this exact pattern play out. First with Mat Armstrong, and now with Mark McCann. Two different owners, two different cars, and the same story. Incredible engineering locked behind a wall that even the people who own these cars can't get through. If you made it this far, you clearly care about this stuff as much as we do. So do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Drop a like if you're as stunned by this as we were. And let us know in the comments what you think Bugatti should actually do here. Because something tells me this isn't the last time we'll be talking about this car. With both issues sorted, it was time for the moment this whole job had been building toward, rejoining the front and rear sections of the Veyron into a single car. Bugatti has a purpose-built rig for this. The team didn't. So they built their own using basic workshop tools, careful measurements, and a lot of patience. Every connection mattered. Fuel lines, coolant hoses, wiring looms, and titanium bolts engineered to deliberately break in a crash for safety. As one technician put it, there are probably close to 1,000 parts on this car that simply cannot be replaced. Slowly, the two halves were pushed together by hand. For the first time in years, Mark's Veyron was a single, complete car, and for Mark himself, this was the first time he'd ever seen a hole, let alone sat inside it. Two critical fasteners were missing, a titanium spline nut holding the two halves together, and an engine mount bolt securing the powertrain itself. So Mark called Bugatti and asked to buy them. Not an engine, not a gearbox, just a nut and a bolt for a £1,000,000 car. The answer: bring the whole car to an official Bugatti facility or get nothing. Mark even checked with a barrister about whether this was legal. Technically, yes. Dealers are bound by Bugatti's policy, and there's no direct contract between Bugatti and a second-hand owner. But the barrister also noted that this kind of blanket refusal could potentially be challenged through an automotive ombudsman. Even the dealer Mark spoke to admitted it wasn't their call. It was Bugatti policy, plain and simple. Without the fasteners, the team kept going anyway. The Veyron runs 10 separate radiators, 3 for engine cooling, 3 turbo intercoolers, plus dedicated radiators for the engine oil, the transmission, the differential, and the air conditioning. After more than a year apart, nobody knew if any of those 10 radiators, or the dozens of connections between them, had developed a leak. So the team ran a vacuum test across the entire system. It held perfectly. Not one leak anywhere. Coolant went in, battery, exhaust, brakes, all done. Everything was ready except for one thing. The biggest worry left wasn't the engine. It was the clutch kiss point, the exact moment the clutch engages and the car starts to move. That setting had been calibrated for the old clutch material, and nobody could be sure the reverse-engineered plates would behave the same way. Worst case, the car could lurch unexpectedly, and was parked just feet away from a pair of priceless Ferrari F40s. The team fired it up. Pressure built and held. No leaks. First gear, straight across. Mark, visibly emotional after everything this car had been through, selected it. The Veyron rolled forward under its own power, for the first time in years. But the real test was reverse. The fault that started this entire saga. Mark shifted through neutral, selected reverse, and the car rolled backward. The whole workshop erupted. Let that sink in. A Bugatti that arrived in two pieces. Missing a working transmission, with a gearbox Bugatti had effectively written off. Now drives forward and backward. Rebuilt by independent specialists who recreated the parts Bugatti refused to sell. And Bugatti's role in all of it? Refusing to sell a single nut and bolt unless the entire car was shipped to them. This is the second time in weeks we've seen this exact pattern. First Mat Armstrong, now Mark McCann. Same story, different car. Incredible engineering, locked behind a wall the owners themselves can't get past. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, drop a like, and let us know in the comments what you think Bugatti should do here. Something tells me this story isn't over yet.